When my ex's new wife demanded my late father's estate, I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just smiled and let the courts do the talking. And karma did the rest. You see, she thought marrying my ex meant inheriting my family's legacy. She even started taking deposits for influencer retreats at a lake house she didn't own. What she didn't know, my father saw through them years ago, and he left behind more than just a will. My name is Kaylin, and if there's one thing I've always been sure of, it's that my father, Elias, was my anchor in this world. He wasn't loud or flashy. He didn't chase praise or status. But when he walked into a room, people noticed. My dad built his auto parts business from nothing, one small garage in Michigan that grew into a statewide network. But more than his success, it was his character that stood out. He was steady, intentional, and fiercely loyal. And he loved my mom and me with everything he had. Growing up, I never once felt unsure of where I stood in his world. My mom, Beatrice, was the heart of our home. Soft, thoughtful, always the one with a warm hug and a perfectly timed joke. The three of us were close, the kind of close that made holidays magical and everyday dinners feel special. But then we lost her. Cancer doesn't care how good someone is. It doesn't pause for love or legacy. My mum was gone in under a year from diagnosis, and it shattered both of us. My dad stopped smiling the way he used to. The house felt heavier, quieter. For almost 2 years, it was just the two of us trying to pretend we were okay, moving through life like ghosts. That's when Caleb came in. I met him at a friend's birthday dinner. He was magnetic, funny, confident, the kind of man who made everyone lean in when he spoke. He asked me questions, listened like every word mattered, and for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. It didn't take long for things to get serious. Within months, we were a couple. My dad tried to hide his hesitation, but I could tell something didn't sit right with him. He once said, "There's something performative about him." I laughed it off. Thought maybe he was just being protective. After all, who really likes the person their daughter's dating? Caleb proposed less than a year after we met, and I said yes without hesitation. The wedding was small but beautiful. My dad walked me down the aisle, his hand shaking just a little. At the reception, he made a toast, short but meaningful. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass, though his eyes never quite met Caleb's. Looking back now, I realized that moment said more than I understood. My dad saw something I didn't, something I wasn't ready to see. But love can be blinding, and at the time I was just grateful to feel alive again. At first, everything felt perfect. Caleb and I settled into a comfortable rhythm. We had dinner at my dad's lake house every Sunday, took long drives up the coast, and started planning a future that seemed brighter than ever. I was head over heels, and for the first time in years, my dad seemed to be coming back to life too. He was still grieving, of course, but he seemed to appreciate Caleb's attention, even if it was a little much at times. In the early months of our marriage, Caleb's real estate consultancy seemed to be taking off, and my dad, ever the businessman, couldn't help but see the potential. Caleb was charming, flattering, and quick to accept help. I didn't think much of it at the time when my dad began giving him small loans for business investments. After all, they were family now, right? And Caleb did have a way of making people feel like they were part of something bigger. But, as time went on, I started hearing unsettling things. Things I wasn't prepared for. Caleb started making little jokes about inheriting things. My dad's lake house, the business empire, even the family name. It wasn't always overt, but it was there. I would catch him mentioning how nice it would be to take over my dad's auto parts business one day, or how he couldn't wait to inherit a few of the properties my dad had been managing. It didn't sit right with me, but I brushed it off, assuming it was just his confidence and way of bonding with my dad. Then came the night that changed everything. We had just finished a dinner with my father, and we were alone in the living room, drinking wine and talking. Caleb, in his usual playful manner, leaned back in his chair and made another one of those jokes about inheriting the lake house. But this time, something felt different. It wasn't a joke anymore. It was an assertion. I've always thought that lake house would be a nice place for the family, Caleb said with a grin. Maybe one day I'll be the one living there. It's got good bones, don't you think? I froze. My dad, sitting just a few feet away, barely flinched, but I could see the subtle tightening around his eyes. He didn't like it. I could tell. The next few weeks felt different, too. Caleb's remarks became more frequent, and my dad began withdrawing from their usual conversations. I could feel the growing tension between the two men in my life, but I didn't want to acknowledge it. It wasn't until my father and I had a private dinner that I understood what was truly happening. "I have changed my will," he said, his voice steady but firm. I stopped mid-bite, staring at him. "What? Why?" "I've made some adjustments," he replied calmly. "Everything goes to you, Kaylin, not because I don't trust you, but because I don't trust him." I blinked, confused. "Dad? Caleb's just joking around. He's not serious about any of this." "You're wrong," he said, shaking his head. "He's not here for you, Kaylin. He's here for what I've built. And I see it clearly now. The moment you two married, it was as though he thought he was entitled to everything." I felt a pang in my chest. I had never seen my father so certain, so unwavering. I wanted to argue, to say that Caleb wasn't like that, but the look in my father's eyes stopped me. The business, the property, the investments, everything goes to you. You're the only one I trust. But the will won't take effect until you turn 35, or if something happens to me before then. I swallowed hard, trying to process it all. This wasn't a simple conversation. This wasn't my dad's usual cautious nature. This was something final. I had no idea at the time, but the trust he set up with his lawyer was airtight. Every penny, every asset, every business share was now officially tied to me, and Caleb had no claim to any of it. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I understood just how far my dad had gone to protect me. He had even recorded a video explaining his decision. His voice was clear and firm, his words deliberate. But I had no idea just how important that video would be. Still, I wasn't ready to believe that my husband, the man I had married, the man I loved, was so calculating, so cold. But my dad's decision wasn't born of paranoia. It was born of years of watching Caleb grow more entitled, more demanding, and more manipulative. I hadn't seen the red flags then, but looking back now, they were there. My father had already made his move, an unshakable legal shield between me and the man who had once promised me forever. And I had no idea what would happen next. The signs were always there. Caleb's late nights, the distance in his eyes, the sudden lack of affection, it all added up, even if I didn't want to admit it. But it wasn't until the night I caught him that everything came crashing down. I had been out with friends, enjoying a rare night of fun when I came home earlier than expected. I expected Caleb to be asleep in bed, but instead, I walked into the living room and froze. There he was, texting someone, his thumb moving rapidly across the screen, and the smile on his face. It wasn't for me. I stepped forward, and the moment he saw me, his face twisted into panic. "Kaylin, what the hell is this?" I demanded, snatching his phone from his hand. I scanned the messages, sweet words, flirtations, and what seemed like plans to meet up. "You've got to be kidding me," I whispered, my heart sinking in my chest. He tried to explain, but there was no use. The truth was in black and white, right there on the screen. Caleb had been seeing someone else. A woman named Jolene, a social media influence with a following bigger than mine. He had been cheating on me for months. The man I thought I knew, the man I had married, had been living a double life. I felt sick, betrayed, humiliated. I was angry, but all I could do was stare at him in disbelief. I don't love you anymore, Kaylin," Caleb said, his voice low and almost apologetic. "Then why didn't you just leave?" I spat, my voice trembling with a mix of fury and heartbreak. His response was chillingly simple. "I didn't want to hurt you, but I'm done here." And just like that, he was gone. The divorce papers arrived a few days later, drawn up without any fight from him. He wasn't interested in trying to work things out or making amends. The house, the assets, the entire life we'd built together, all of it was discarded, like I was just another part of his past that he had no use for anymore. It was a shock, yes, but not unexpected. Caleb didn't fight me. He didn't even stay around to argue. He just disappeared. Within months, Caleb moved on, just like I knew he would. He was spotted with Jolene at exclusive events, flashing smiles for the cameras. He had the audacity to flaunt their relationship on social media, tagging her in every post, as if to say, "Look at what I've moved on to." It stung, seeing him with her, knowing how easily he had replaced me. I used to wonder if she knew he was the kind of man who could throw away a marriage with no remorse, but I never let myself get too deep into it. He wasn't my problem anymore. I did my best to move on too. I poured myself into work, my friendships, and the occasional vacation to take my mind off of the man who had broken my heart. Slowly, I started to rebuild. It wasn't easy, but I was getting there. The pain of betrayal had dulled, and I began to see life beyond Caleb. But just when I thought I was free of him, life threw a cruel curveball. One afternoon, I was scrolling through my social media feed when a notification popped up. It was from a news outlet, the headline flashing across my phone screen: Caleb Westbrook and Jolene Marlowe involved in deadly crash. I froze. The world seemed to stop for a moment as I read the details. Caleb and Jolene had been in a car accident, and neither of them survived. They were both gone, just like that. A headline, a story, an end. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to feel relief, even a strange sense of justice, after everything he'd put me through. But the rest of me felt hollow. I hadn't thought about him for months, but here I was, staring at his face again, not as the man I had loved, but as a tragic story. I couldn't even feel anger anymore, just a deep sadness for the man I once knew and the woman who would never get to know the full extent of his lies. I never got to hear Caleb's side of the story. Why he had cheated, why he had left, or even what happened in those final months. And now, it didn't matter, but there was something else in the back of my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. His death, tragic as it was, wasn't the last chapter in this story. I had a feeling that something far bigger, something I never expected, was about to unfold. It was a quiet morning when I received the call, the kind of call you never expect, yet always dread. My father, Elias, had passed away peacefully in his sleep. He had lived a full life, and in many ways, I was relieved for him. After the years of struggle, the heart attacks, the fights with his own health, I knew he had found peace. I didn't know how to feel, though. The weight of it was suffocating. My father had been the anchor in my life, my protector, my guide. Losing him felt like losing everything. The funeral arrangements were, of course, a whirlwind. Family members I hadn't seen in years showed up. Friends who had once been close but had drifted away in the years after my mother's passing came to pay their respects. The church was full and the atmosphere was heavy with grief. I stood at the front by the casket, feeling the sharp sting of loss but also trying to hold myself together for the sake of my father's legacy. And then she showed up. Jolene. The audacity of it took my breath away. She walked into the church, a flash of bright red catching my eye from across the room. A colour so loud, so out of place in a setting meant for mourning. Red. It wasn't even the kind of colour one wore to pay respects. It was the kind of colour you wore to a gala, not a funeral. My stomach churned as she approached, wearing her trademark high heels and perfectly styled hair, as if she were attending a fashion show instead of a memorial service. It was hard to believe that she and Caleb had once been together. This woman, who seemed to carry herself like she was the star of the show, even at a time when no one wanted to be the centre of attention. The room fell silent for a moment as people turned to look at her, but she didn't seem to care. She smiled, even as whispers spread. Her lips twisted into an almost smug expression, like she thought she was entitled to be there. I stood in the back, clenching my fists, trying to remain composed. I had promised myself that I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me react. Caleb was dead, and I wasn't going to let his mess, his mistakes, infect my father's memory too. Not today, but the tension was palpable. I could feel the eyes of the other mourners on us, sensing the awkwardness in the air. Jolene, clearly unaware or unbothered by the discomfort she was causing, made her way toward the front of the room. She even took a seat in the second row, directly in the line of sight to the podium where my father's eulogy would soon be given. She never even glanced my way, and I never looked at her directly, but her presence, her disrespect, hung like a thick cloud in the room. I had to bite my tongue to stop from confronting her. I could feel the fire inside of me burning, but I knew my father wouldn't want me to stoop to her level. So, I simply stood there, silent and steady, focusing on my father's legacy, on the people who genuinely cared, on the peace that he had now found. The funeral went on and Jolene stayed the entire time, casting shadows over the solemn occasion. People whispered behind her back, some in disgust, others in confusion. She acted like she was doing a favor by showing up, like she had any right to be there at all. But as the ceremony concluded and the casket was lowered into the earth, I stood tall. My father's wishes had been clear, and she wasn't part of that. As for me, I wasn't going to let her or anyone else steal my peace. Not then. Not ever. 3 weeks after my father's funeral, just when I thought the worst was behind me, I received a letter that stopped me cold. It was a request for mediation. From Jolene. Yes, that Jolene. My ex-husband's widow. The same woman who showed up to my father's funeral in fire truck red and posted a carousel of funeral fashion inspo the next day. I remember staring at the envelope, rereading the attorney's letter 3 times before I could even process what it said. Jolene was formally challenging my father's will. She claimed that she had a right to part of his estate. Why? Because she was the surviving spouse of Caleb Whitaker, my ex-husband, and therefore, according to her, she had inherited his stake in my father's property. She referred to Caleb as a rightful successor to my dad's legacy and claimed they had been preparing to take over some of Elias's business interests. I almost laughed, except it wasn't funny. Jolene alleged that Caleb had an oral agreement with my father regarding the lake house and some commercial assets. She said Caleb had invested his own money in upkeep and that Elias had promised him a share in the event of his death. She argued that as Caleb's legal heir, she was entitled to what was his. She even attached social media screenshots, photos of Caleb helping my father unload boxes in a warehouse, an old post of them fishing together. Evidence of a working relationship, the letter called it. But here's what Jolene didn't know. My father had rewritten his will 2 years before Caleb even died. Not only had he removed Caleb completely, but he'd also placed everything in an airtight trust, one that couldn't be challenged by anyone outside of a very short, clearly defined list. And Jolene? She wasn't on it. She had never even met my father while he was drafting it. Still, she pressed on. She claimed equitable interest, referencing supposed contributions she and Caleb made toward renovations. She even said they'd already taken deposits from renters to lease out the lake house that legally wasn't even theirs. This wasn't just a money grab. It was a gamble. A high-stakes attempt to intimidate me into settling quickly. But I didn't flinch. I contacted my father's lawyer, and we responded with 3 simple words. See you there. We declined mediation. If Jolene wanted to fight over an estate she had no legal claim to, we'd let a judge watch her try. Because everything she thought she could manipulate, every loophole, every half-truth, every fake receipt was about to unravel in court. What Jolene didn't realise was that my father hadn't just planned for the future, he'd fortified it. And the moment she walked into that courtroom thinking she could charm, bluff, or bully her way into his legacy, she stepped right into the legal ambush she never saw coming. The day of the hearing, I arrived early, dressed in black, with my father's watch clasped around my wrist like armour. I wasn't nervous. I was focused. Jolene, on the other hand, sauntered in 45 minutes late, wearing designer heels and oversized sunglasses like she was walking a red carpet. She didn't even bring a lawyer. Instead, she represented herself, claiming she didn't trust anyone else to tell her story. "Your Honour," she said in her opening, "I am here today because my late husband, Caleb Whitaker, was more than just a son-in-law to Elias Carter. He was a partner, a confidant, and, in many ways, a successor." The judge didn't blink. Jolene went on, dramatically unfolding printed screenshots of Instagram posts where Caleb was seen helping my father around his storage warehouse. She claimed those photos proved Caleb was an unpaid employee and therefore entitled to retroactive compensation or equity. She cried. She claimed she and Caleb had spent months helping renovate my father's lake house. She even pulled out what looked like a fake invoice for contractor deposits, allegedly made from Caleb's joint account, which had conveniently been closed 2 years before my father's death. Then she made her boldest move yet. She declared that her and Caleb had verbally agreed with my father that they would inherit the lake house and manage the property as a family legacy. The courtroom was quiet for a moment, until my attorney stood up. He didn't shout. He didn't posture. He calmly placed a copy of my father's trust documents before the judge. "These papers," he said, "were notarized, signed in the presence of legal witnesses, and filed over 2 years before Mr. Whitaker's passing. They state, in clear language, that the entirety of Mr. Elias Carter's estate is to pass into a trust managed solely by his daughter, Kaylin Carter. No other beneficiaries. No alternate successors. No exceptions." Then he handed over the kicker, an email chain between my father and his estate attorney, in which he specifically referenced removing Caleb from the will after ongoing concerns regarding character and intent. Jolene went pale. Her voice lost its charm. She fumbled through a last-minute plea, arguing emotional equity and claiming that as a widow she was being unfairly punished. The judge didn't buy it. He ruled swiftly. "All claims dismissed with prejudice. The trust stands. Any attempts to lease or collect deposits from the Carter estate will be considered fraud and referred to the district attorney." Jolene didn't look at me when she left, but as she passed, I noticed her phone buzz. An alert from one of her followers, probably asking when she'd be doing her next house tour. The house she never owned. I walked out into the crisp autumn air, head high, heart steady. The battle was over, and my father's legacy was right where it belonged, with me. I didn't cry when I won. I didn't throw a party or post a victory quote on Instagram. Instead, I drove straight to my dad's lake house, the very one Jolene had tried to claim, and sat on the porch swing with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The lake was calm, silent, peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in years. I thought about how my dad used to sit here every morning, sipping his coffee, mumbling about birds and balance sheets. He'd built this house from the ground up after Mum died, calling it his quiet place. It had been his refuge, and now it was mine. The legal battle had taken months, but the aftermath was quicker than expected. Jolene's influencer career took a nosedive almost immediately after the court's ruling. Word got out. She had collected deposits for property she didn't own. The tenants she'd promised leases to were furious. One even filed a police report. Her accounts were soon flooded with angry comments, and brands began pulling their partnerships. By the end of the month, her main page was gone. Deleted. Vanished. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she'd moved back in with her sister 2 states away, that she was trying to rebrand as a lifestyle coach. I didn't care to look. As for me, I took my time. I had inherited more than just property. My dad had left behind journals, recordings, and a treasure trove of business notes. Reading them was like hearing his voice again. He documented everything, including the day he changed his will. In one entry, dated just days before he passed, he wrote, Kaylin may not understand this now, but one day she'll see it wasn't about punishment. It was about protection. He was right. At first, I had been furious when he cut Caleb out of the will. I thought it was a personal vendetta, an overreach, but now, after everything, I realized it was love. The kind of love that plans ahead, that anticipates danger, even when you can't see it yet. That protects you, even after they're gone. I stayed at the lake house for a few weeks, healing in the silence. No noise, no legal briefs, no tabloid-worthy drama. Just peace. Then one morning I made a decision. I walked into my dad's old office, opened the dusty filing cabinet, and found the folder labelled Community Initiative. It was his dream project, transforming the land next to the lake into a retreat for single parents and their kids. A space for healing, mentorship, and nature. He never finished it, but I would. 6 months later, I launched the Carter Haven Foundation. With the trust assets, community grants, and the help of a few old friends of Dad's, we broke ground that summer. It felt like coming full circle, like Dad was still here, quietly cheering me on. Sometimes people ask if I ever think about Caleb or Jolene, if I feel bitter. The truth? No. Caleb's absence gave me clarity, and my father's wisdom gave me everything else. So no, I didn't fight when she came for the estate. I didn't scream, I didn't beg, I simply sat back and let the truth do what it always does. Shine. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my situation? Remember, new stories drop every day.